some of the considerations that you should have ahead of time, and understand so that you're not causing issues when they actually are going into a facility. And hopefully we're also going to dispel some myths regarding how long-term care planning works and some of the problems that people face. So just another couple of minutes. There's going to be a number of materials also that we're providing for everybody who's registered for the class. One of them is red flags for parents' estate plans. So that would mean like different common problems we see in how an estate plan is put together, and in particular the types of issues we might find when somebody's facing care because of a poor estate plan. And then another handout is going to be do's and don'ts when it comes to paying bills for parents. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We are doing our next session here on estate planning topics. Today's session is going to be on what to do and what to avoid when people's parents are facing long-term care. This is a really common topic of concern for a large amount of our client base, mostly because the cost of long-term care is pretty substantial. A lot of financial advisors refer to it as sort of the biggest threat in somebody's estate for comfortable retirement, because most people don't have the necessary annual income to support ongoing care costs. It's very common for assisted living facilities to run, between $50,000 and $70,000 a year, and skilled nursing facilities, in the Appleton area, for instance, are going to average pretty close to about $120,000 a year. So most people don't have, $10,000 a month in income in retirement, which means they're going to pretty quickly be going through savings. And so some of the concerns that we hear, of course, are, well, is my spouse going to be able to still live in the home and maintain their lifestyle if we've got an extra $10,000 a month bill coming out? And also, well, how am I going to make sure that I'm going to receive good care and maintain everything that I'm hoping to if I'm facing this kind of bill that's inevitably going to exhaust all of my resources? So, it's a common thing that we talk to a lot of clients about. I'm actually teaching this one. Normally we're at the office. We had a power outage this morning that affected our server and some other things. So I'm actually teaching this one from my home. So hopefully no cats pop up and distract me while I'm chatting with you guys. As always with these sessions, if you have a question while we're going here, please just type it in. If you're registered through Zoom, you can just type it in the chat box, and I'm going to address all the questions that I can get to at the end of this session. So, lastly, I should mention that our next session on estate planning topics is going to be June 10th at noon. So same time and day. It's a recurring class on Wednesdays at noon. Thanks for attending. Hopefully you find this useful. So as I was saying, care costs are a really common concern for people. And so the first step is, okay, where are we gonna get care? What's gonna be the best situation for mom or dad? Meaning not all facilities are set up the same. Some facilities are fantastic for, say, memory care issues, but maybe not great for people who have mobility issues. Not everybody is the master of all things. And so matching up the type of care that you need to the appropriate facility is a really important first step, because obviously the primary first concern needs to be, what's the best situation for mom or dad? So obviously, touring facilities, which of course is very challenging right now, because a lot of places you can't physically go to because of the pandemic right now. But a lot of places are being very accommodating with things like Zoom tours, meaning like a mobile walk around of the facility, and you can interact with staff to get questions answered. But even doing that on your own can get a little overwhelming. And I find that for a lot of clients, that it's that first sort of, oh my God, we're rushing in an emergency because something has happened and we're trying to find a good spot, and we have a limited window of time, and there's 100 facilities around here. How in the world do I pick the right one? And so there are resources out there that I often refer my clients to. Geriatric care managers, senior advisors, life aging professionals, where their job is to talk to the family, understand the priorities, the limitations of the person, the care needs that they have, and match them up with the appropriate facility based on the criteria that they've discussed with the family. And that can be such a load off, because unless you have a background in this kind of stuff, how do you know you're making the right decision? And like I said, you can't tour all 100 of these facilities to know this. So I really encourage people to talk to one of these professionals, have a conversation, because again, it's their job to understand the ins and outs of these facilities and ask the type of questions of the staff there that you might not know enough to ask yourself, so that you really are doing your due diligence, best job you possibly can in selecting, the most appropriate new home for mom and dad. Because remember, this could be their new home for years going forward. And so it's a big decision, and one not to take lightly. And I'm a big advocate of getting some assistance. And in certain circumstances, that assistance might not even cost anything. And so really, talking to somebody and understanding what is the best spot is always step one in this. It also helps with any kind of planning that you might be doing with an elder law attorney like myself, because it becomes difficult when you are actually, transitioning into care to do planning for the finances if we have no idea what the cost is going to be. I might be suggesting very different things for somebody who has, a monthly expense of $4,500 versus somebody who has a monthly expense of $9,500. So, that's a good first step is, either contacting the estate planning attorney or contacting one of these care professionals to, again, get the assessment. One of the most problematic misunderstandings that people have ends up being that they think that if there isn't 5 years prior to care, meaning, okay, mom's slipped, fell, is going into the nursing home right now, and we don't have 5 years to do planning, people think there's nothing that can be done. And that is just absolutely incorrect. Please be careful of where you're getting that kind of information. Even well-intentioned sources, the hospital, the care facility itself, social worker, they're not necessarily fully informed of your different options. Again, that's kind of where the elder law attorney comes in. And there's no magic bullets in this kind of planning. It's very facts driven and based on what the priorities for the family are. But you should really know and tell others, even if there's not 5 years in advance, you can still do very valuable planning to stretch out assets, make sure that, mom who's still living at home can maintain her lifestyle, even though dad's transitioning into an expensive care facility. There's things that can be done. So spread the word on that, because I can't tell you how many times I have a family come in just thinking, we're facing this care, but I guess we'd ask you, we didn't think anything can be done, but we figured what's the harm in asking? And I'm able to, tell them based on their circumstances, very positive news. So it's a nice surprise for them, but I really wish it wasn't a surprise at all. I wish that was just much more common knowledge amongst the general public. So one of the things you're going to want to make sure of is having a good handle on what mom or dad's finances are, because you need to know what you might be able to afford, what you're trying to plan with. You can't make a plan if you have no idea what your ingredients are. And in this kind of case, your ingredients are going to be, what are the various assets? What kind of income do they have? What kind of savings do they have? What's their home worth? Do they have life insurance? Different things like that, because without having a handle on that kind of thing, you obviously can't possibly plan or know what they can afford. Also, you may have a parent who has spent their whole life being very kind of closed mouth on finances. That's very common with, the generation that's in their 80s or 90s now, where, discussing finances was almost considered somewhat of a taboo thing. And so they don't share these things readily. If you step into a situation like that, one of the first things you want to look for is the power of attorney for finances, if there is one. So you need to understand what kind of estate plan that they have. So get that power of attorney for finances, because whoever's listed on there is the person who's going to be able to have access to information with different companies. So if you are in the unfortunate situation of having to go hunting for assets because there's no, sharing of information, consolidated list, and maybe the situation is that mom or dad don't have capacity anymore, or are in a position where they can't really assist you in figuring out what it is that they have. Well, the power of attorney is going to be invaluable for being able to go to the bank, get information, call the insurance companies, things like that. You're also going to want to take a look at, do they have long-term care insurance that you just maybe didn't even know about because it hadn't come up in conversation, and it's one of these financial things that they didn't really want to talk about ahead of time. So if they have long-term care insurance, take a look at that policy, and also call the insurance company, because the policy might be the original policy that you found, but perhaps there's been changes made over the years, and you want to know, well, what is the actual coverage and how does this thing work right now? And so a conversation with the agent can be incredibly helpful, because the policy might indicate on there that, okay, this thing pays $100 a day, so we know we've got that. But maybe that policy also has an inflation rider on there, which means that it goes up in value over a period of time. So, and maybe your parent opted for different things over the years, because maybe they got the option of, okay, we want to keep our premiums flat because the premiums were going to go up in cost. And one of the ways to keep the premium flat was to get rid of the inflation rider. So you want to know that, hey, this thing that says it's going to pay $100 a day, what it's actually going to end up paying, because who knows, maybe if it's a 25-year-old policy, it's actually going to pay $250 a day. So know what you have and what you're working with. And most long-term care policies, for instance, are going to have an elimination period on there. The most common one that I see is 90 days. And an elimination period is basically, hey, for the first 90 days, you're going to keep paying out of pocket for the cost of the facility before the policies kicks in. Not all of them have the 90-day elimination period, but that's just the most common one that I see. So again, all of this boils down to know their financial circumstances, because that's going to help you plan. Any estate planner, elder law attorney that you would go to, one of the first things they're going to want to know is, hey, if there's somebody's going into the nursing home and you're concerned about cost, okay, what assets are we working with? Because again, that's what you're planning with, and they can't plan if they don't know what they're planning with. Okay. Also, don't do any gifting, but also create a list of any gifts that have happened over the last 5 years. This brings us back to the point of, well, since we don't have 5 years, that misunderstanding that, okay, nothing can be done, right? Which again, I already said is wrong. But there is going to be effects if there's been gifts over the last 5 years. And so you want to tally all of those up. Not because they were intentionally made thinking that somebody's going to end up going into the nursing home, but there's not really much of a safe haven for giving gifts over the previous 5 years of when the person goes into the nursing home. So this is another one of the most common sort of fallacies or misunderstandings amongst the public. A lot of people think, oh, what's that amount I can give every year without having to report it to the IRS. And by the way, that amount is $15,000. But people think that that amount is some kind of safe haven for having made gifts. And it's just simply not. That's a reporting requirement to the IRS, not a safe haven for applying for Medicaid. So don't confuse those two things. They have nothing to do with one another. So just because you can write a check to your kids 15 grand each doesn't mean you've just saved that money from the nursing home. There is not a safe haven like that. So you're going to want to tally up any of those prior gifts over the last 5 years to know, okay, are there potential penalties that can be assessed for having made these transfers? And there's certain exemptions and exceptions for making for there to be a penalty for having made these transfers. One of the most notable is if the gift was made to somebody who has a child that has a disability, even if that child is an adult. So what I mean by child, I mean the son or daughter of the person going into the nursing home. If they have a disability and you've written a check to them, that check is not going to be a penalty when the person goes into the nursing home and might need to later apply for Medicaid. And there's numerous other exemptions, not enough time to talk about them all today. But just know that, this is one of the types of things that an elder law attorney would walk through the family with to understand, okay, what's the financial situation and how are we going to do planning, knowing what circumstances we're actually in because of things that have been done in the past. Another situation that is very common and very problematic, and we talked somewhat about this at a session a couple of weeks ago, is people, if they have care needs, will often pay like a child or a relative to provide that care. Their son took early retirement or their daughter quit her job in order to provide consistent care that mom or dad needed. But maybe it's getting to a point where even that care is not adequate enough, or they're just not in a position to maintain providing that care. So now we're transitioning into a care facility. Well, those payments would be a penalized transfer of assets if before the care was provided, there was not a caregiver agreement in place. So what I mean by that is you have to have a notarized caregiver agreement in place prior to the kid giving that help, or else all those payments to that kid can end up causing penalties and going into the nursing home. So it's better to catch that ahead of time by knowing, hey, if I want to provide care for mom or dad, I better not just do that without having a contract in place if I expect to get paid. Because otherwise I might be causing them a big financial hardship later in having a totally unnecessary penalty on them where they have to spend even more of their money in the nursing home, or maybe all of their money in the nursing home, and without any opportunity to protect anything. So, make sure caregiver agreements, if care becomes necessary, that you talk to an elder law attorney and have that thing notarized in advance. Also, don't be paying any kind of bills directly and getting reimbursed yourself. That causes a trouble in the paper trail. And I believe I mentioned this in a previous class as well. And that's because if you're putting in an application for assistance in paying for care, and the person assessing the application is seeing, oh, what are these? Why is he giving his kid $600 here? Because their assumption is going to be, well, they're just trying to get rid of that money so it doesn't go to the nursing home. So if they're paying you, if they're reimbursing you, you have to have held all of those receipts and be able to prove, no, he's not just trying to sneak me $600. Here's the receipt for the thing I bought him and he's just paying me back. You can do that, but it's much easier if you just see the receipt or the bank statement saying, hey, that $600 went to Target, not to, Brian the child. Going to be a lot less scrutiny on those types of transactions. So then when the person's facing these types of care needs and planning is kind of inevitable or appropriate now, it's what we call emergency planning. Emergency planning is, hey, we don't have 5 years in advance of needing care. So what can we scramble and do in less than 5 years, or sometimes less than 5 minutes, or maybe the person's been in the nursing home already for 5 years. What is the planning that's going to be available to us to make sure that we can hold on to as much assets as possible so that, again, mom's okay, still living in the home and can afford it, or maybe dad's a widow, he's the one who's going into the care facility, and we want to make sure that he can still afford to go out to dinner and things like that. The type of stuff that, Medicaid doesn't pay for everything, it just pays for care. It's not going to pay for you to get a haircut or to have fun or anything like that. So the first step in anything is, I'd mentioned earlier, we want to understand what the estate plan is. The power of attorney document, which I mentioned earlier, can be very useful for finding the different assets and dealing with the different financial institutions. Well, sometimes I have to be the bearer of bad news in that a lot of planning is possible through a power of attorney document. And I'm talking about a power of attorney for finances. And if you're not familiar with these, it's a document where it's naming one or more individuals as agents to act on the behalf of the person who has become incapacitated or needs help in managing their financial affairs. So there's a lot of planning that can get done through one of those documents. You can authorize that person to do all sorts of things. However, the powers have to be in that document. And so many people think that, okay, if I'm the power of attorney, that means I can just do whatever for the best interest of my parent. And that's just not the case. It means you can do whatever the document says you can do. And so this is where I've mentioned sometimes I have to be the bearer of bad news. I'll have a family come in because there was some health event for mom, let's say, and she was in the hospital rehabbing, and now it just looks like it's going to be, not possible to go home. It's just not going to be a safe environment, and it looks like care is going to be a permanent need for her. Well, in a situation like that, the power of attorney in taking over the finances, if mom doesn't have capacity and can't, make financial decisions for herself, that family comes in, they want to talk to me because they've been jumping online in a big scurry, worried about the, financial situation and how she's going to afford care and is this going to wipe her out. So they come across, oh, Peter Harbach, he's an elder law attorney. Maybe it's appropriate to talk to him. Give me a call and we sit down and talk. And one of the first things I want to see if mom doesn't have capacity herself is, well, let me see this power of attorney, because that's my toolbox at that point. It doesn't matter how smart I am, just like it doesn't matter how good of a home builder you've hired. If they have no tools to work with, then they're not going to build you a great house. Well, power of attorney if it doesn't explicitly give certain powers that are necessary to do long-term care planning, then we just don't have the authority to do the things that might be most beneficial. And there's no, I wish I could give you guys hey, just look for this couple of sentences in a power of attorney, and if they're there, you're fine. It doesn't really work that way. There's numerous different things that can be done in the context of somebody needing care. And again, if the power of attorney does not have the power, you just can't do that particular thing. And so you want to be very exhaustive in your power of attorney. There's no way you're going to provide all those types of powers in a little 1 or 2 page document, or the statutory state form that you print off the internet. It's just, it becomes impossible to list all of those things in a little short boilerplate form. So I wish I could just turn everybody to, hey, just make sure you have 2 sentences in your power of attorney and then you'll be okay, because there's just nothing that gets me more down in the dumps than a family who's come requesting my help and me having to give news of, given the situation that you're in, there's just no way for you to execute a plan that I could put together. So there's just no sense in hiring me to do anything, because I could guide you, but we can't execute it, so it's worthless. That's one of those things that there's no good answer to. And so the only way you can avoid it is by making sure that prior to somebody losing capacity, that they have a good, appropriate power of attorney in place that allows the different types of planning that might be possible when when kind of the rubber hits the road and they're in that bad financial situation. We know we've got the tools that are necessary to fix things and stretch out assets. So if one person requires care out of a married couple, certain things are protected under Medicaid laws and certain things are not. You should also always inquire, hey, were either of my parents ever in the military? Because a few weeks ago, we did a whole class on a VA pension benefit that can help pay for long-term care. And I certainly don't want a family leaving any money on the table where they could have an additional, say, couple of $1,000s tax-free that might help pay for a care facility. So make sure you know whether or not they were in the military. It's not all military veterans are automatically qualified, but generally speaking, 90 days of active duty service with one of those days landing in a wartime period for other than training purposes, that person very well could qualify for pension. So if you have a veteran loved one, just keep that one in the back of your mind and act on it if they ever have a consistent care need. Whether it's at-home care, assisted living, skilled nursing, that can be just an absolutely wonderful program. But for everybody else who's not a veteran, the spouse of the veteran, or excuse me, the spouse of the person who needs care, they don't have to spend down to nothing. And if a nursing home told you, oh, you've got to spend down to $50,000, that's probably wrong also. Because unless the person who is giving you advice on this understands what are all of your finances, what the exemptions are for Medicaid, because not everything necessarily counts for a married couple towards that $50,000 mark. And also, what was the total value of everything when you went into a facility? Because that can affect, all of those things can affect how much can the spouse who's out in the community keep. And so I've had situations where, I'm almost hitting my head against the wall because somebody didn't contact me for a couple of years where they've been in a facility and they say, oh yeah, the facility told us that we have to spend down to $50,000. And so we've just been paying the bill and I'm just coming in to talk about updating my will when I die or something like that. Well, again, because of certain exemptions and whatnot, I mean, the specific situation I'm telling you about here, they actually had an exempt asset worth over $100,000 that they were able to hold on to. It was actually a 401k fund that was owned by the spouse who was out in the community, that because nobody actually explained how these rules work, they thought they had to spend everything down and just had to have a total value of $50,000. And I find this after the fact, and oh my God, you could have kept all of this particular fund, but now it's too late because some of it's already spent. So, I'd rather catch somebody late than never, because we were able to hold on to some amount of money there. But again, you have to really have a handle on what the different exemptions are for your particular situation. Don't listen to anybody telling you a blanket, hey, if you got to spend everything down to 50 grand and then your spouse is qualified. That's just terrible advice. Somebody needs to sit down and do a full assessment with all of the rules in mind, who's advocating on your behalf. A facility who wants you to continue paying them is not necessarily looking for your advocacy on, okay, how do we make sure that you're able to hold on to as much as you legally possibly can. So just very critical to do a deep dive into what the assets are and what the different exemptions are. Again, if a spouse is out in the community, they're able to hold on to their own income. And if their own income is less than it's between $2,800 and $2,900. If their own income is, say, just Social Security of $1,000 a month, and their spouse has some income too, you can be on Medicaid and actually get some income from your spouse who's in the nursing home to bring you up to about that $2,800, $2,900 a month mark. So you're not expected to just have to live at home on just the $1,000 a month you make, because how in the world are you going to be able to maintain that home without at least a minimum amount of income, so that you can afford not just food, but also your, if you had a mortgage payment or your taxes for your home. The fact that the home is exempt, meaning nobody's going to kick a spouse out for staying at home or force them to sell their home. The question becomes, is it affordable? Can they still be able to hold on to it? And maybe in the circumstances, even having $2,800 a month doesn't allow the home to still be affordable. Again, there's a Q&A box if anybody has questions. I'm running out of time. This is such a lengthy and popular topic that, and I could go on for another couple of hours. I actually teach continuing education credits for CFP, which is Certified Financial Planners, and also CEs for insurance agents. And I usually teach this as a 3-hour class. And so trying to shove in as much information as I can in less than a half an hour is a big challenge for me. But again, the big takeaways are that certain things, if there's a community spouse, meaning one who's not in the nursing home, certain things are safe, certain things are not safe. And don't take any kind of blanket statement about you can have 50,000, you can have 100,000, anything like that. If the person who is knowledgeable has not assessed your finances and all of your assets, then they have no idea what you can keep. They're just throwing things out there. And even if they sound like they know what they're talking about, they don't, because they can't possibly know if they don't know your finances. The other big takeaway is power of attorney is critical. You have to have one that allows long-term care planning if this is a concern of yours for the future. If you have less than 5 years or you have a loved one who's in a nursing home right now, it does not mean you're totally out of luck. The whole 5-year look back is if you are putting in an application, trying to get assistance in paying for care, and you've done something in less than 5 years, you actually have to say on the application, well, this is the stuff I've done in less than 5 years. And there can be penalties for it, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. And so if you do things 5 or more years in advance, that's the best planning, because then you can say on your application, well, I haven't done anything in the last 5 years. And that's a lot less complicated. And you can preserve more assets that way. But even if you don't have those 5 years, please, if you take away nothing from this other than even if you don't have 5 years or somebody's already in care, there's almost always something that can be done. And the best planning is almost always available if there's a power of attorney that allows it. So hopefully this little primer, I mean, this is tip of the iceberg kind of thing, but in a half an hour, it's hard to go into all the detail because this is a very complicated topic in that it's the convergence of state laws, regulations, federal law, tax laws, property laws. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. So I wish there were magic bullets that I could just tell people, hey, you'll be fine, but they're just not. So I'm going to switch gears to see if there are questions. Bear with me for a second. I had a question pop up and then it disappeared. Okay. I just brought up my Q&A window. I know there was at least one question. Sorry, I know it's fun to watch me navigate my screen. In the meantime, while I'm looking for that stuff, I should also mention that our office has written a book, and I actually just rewrote it this past year, called Your Life, Your Legacy, Nursing Homes and Long-Term Care. And the first 50 people that registered for this class will receive a copy of that if you've plugged in all of your contact information so that we can get it out to you. Sorry, this isn't my usual system. Okay, here we go, sorry. Okay, one of the questions I've received is, how do I make sure my parent can get into the nursing home they want to? Some don't seem to take Medicaid. Yeah, that's a fantastic point and 100% correct. So not every facility is licensed and contracted with Medicaid. And so one of the first things you're going to want to do when you're making inquiries, if you have a limited amount of funds, meaning you don't have millions of dollars, so because if you have millions of dollars, you just don't necessarily stay up at night worrying about the cost of care, because even if it's 120 grand a year, you'll be fine. But if there's limited resources and you're worried, boy, they're going to run through everything within their lifetime. So we know that, boy, we can either plan and they'll be on Medicaid and have some money set aside, or not plan and a little bit later they'll be on Medicaid with no money set aside. In either of those situations, you want to be starting them off in a facility that does accept Medicaid. Because otherwise, if you go to a facility that doesn't take Medicaid, once they run out of money, they're also out of that facility. And so a transition later can be challenging. And how you get into a facility is often by basically, hey, I've got money, let me in. Because you'll find a lot of facilities will say, well, we have a number of beds allocated towards Medicaid recipients and some amount of beds that we're keeping for people who will pay out of pocket directly initially. And so how you get your foot in the door is by, hey, I've got money to pay initially. Doesn't mean you have to pay that forever and have no money left. But that's how you can get into the facility that you are hoping to. Now, for skilled nursing facilities, at least the last time I looked, I can't tell you that this is necessarily the current statistic, but in Appleton area, there were 13 nursing homes and 12 of which took Medicaid. I haven't checked that statistic in a little while. The assisted living facilities, there is a smaller percentage of facilities. It's not 90+% the way skilled nursings are, but it is the majority of facilities do participate in something called family care, which is the Medicaid waiver program. So basically think Medicaid. And so, the best thing to do when you're looking at these facilities and understanding budget and everything is, okay, what is our financial circumstance? What is the cost of this facility? Do they take Medicaid? And does that matter for our situation? again, if you got a couple of $1 million, you probably don't care if they take Medicaid because it's very unlikely you're going to run out of funds unless you have a very healthy, but meaning physically healthy person that's going to need care for a long time because maybe it's dementia or Alzheimer's that can cause 10, 15 years of care needs. But if it's somebody with a more modest estate, you're almost inevitably going to want to ask, well, do you take Medicaid? Because, hey, it doesn't matter right now whether they take it or not because we have the funds to pay. But what happens when you don't have the funds to pay? You got to be prepared for that kind of thing and build it into the planning. So to get into the place of your choosing, it's good to have money, almost like sneaking the bouncer a 20 to get into the party. That's the kind of a joke I've made to clients before. Knowing that you've got money to get into the facility of your choosing from the start is a critical component. Okay, and I think weirdly that my answer actually covered another question that I've got in this box. So hopefully, I think that I probably answered both of these questions. Well, I think we're probably set. Hopefully you guys found this useful. And also hopefully next week we'll be back to business as usual, and that I'll have a co-presenter. It's probably a little more tedious to just listen to me ramble for 40 minutes straight with no break. We usually do better with a couple of us talking. But I hope you've found this a good use of your time. Almost by definition, you're very interested in this topic because it's really nice out and you're choosing to spend your time online with me right now on this fairly beautiful day. So I hope you found this a good use of your time. Please, when you get knowledge like this, it's not enough to just know things. Take some action on them. It's great to have a better understanding, but it's even greater to put this into effect so that it's helping somebody that you know and care about. If there's anything that we covered here today that is of particular interest where you want to see how it better applies to your family and you need some assistance with anything, you can contact our office. We offer initial consultations that are complimentary, meaning we don't charge for the initial meeting, where usually we can assess, okay, what's the situation that somebody's in and determine, is there ways to protect anything and make sure that the person is able to maintain a good quality of life and not, pass away with nothing left. So again, thank you for your time. Hopefully you found this useful. Our next session is going to be next week, Wednesday at noon. And everybody take care, stay safe, and enjoy some of this nice weather.